You are different from the rest. Your heart is pure. Rejoice! The broken are the more evolved. Rejoice.
And deeper we go, my beloved true seekers. Deeper into the wastelands of matter and graveyards of broken dreams, to procure our divine spark, our misplaced childhoods and paradises lost. Deeper we go into that inner sanctum of Gnosis, in those outer rectums of reality, in the soul's high adventure. We descend like a grunge Orpheus, attending Sophia, Persephone, Inanna, Alice, the Shekinah, Coraline, or any of the versions of the divine feminine in those stories that plunges into the Hades of the unconscious. Descend into the underworlds of our own ass-rape perception to discover our long-lost sanity.
This is bullshit. I'm not listening to this. You are insane.
No, you're insane. We simply do not have time for this crap.
Please allow me to introduce myself and keep you company as your psychopomp of impossible secrets. I am Abraxas, and his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor, broadcasting from the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago. Deeper we go, here at Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, as we do every week at the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West. Always through the God Above God .can. Welcome, you veterans of 1,000 psychic wars. Welcome, you Revenge of the Myth, you Johnny Cash Bodhisattvas and spiritual entrepreneurs. Welcome to the machine, my son, and the means to escape it. Deeper we go.
What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage. Born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
As we go deeper, we will find much pain, trauma, our shadow. But that's not bad. In a way, I agree with the creepy beast character in the movie Split, when he tells the heroine that those individuals broken due to a tragic past are more evolved. They are pure of heart, but they don't recognize it.
The broken are the more evolved.
You see, your pain, trauma, and shadow, as this show's guest says in his book, have as much right to their own values and experiences as you do. They have a right to be in your life, and they are important Gnostic revealers in your epic journey. If you see them as your lost brothers and sisters, parts of you trying to guide you, they will open new vistas of insights and revelations that will assist in making you a whole individual. And like the apocalypse of Adam states, higher than the ruling gods of this world. You just have to know them. It's not easy, and I know I often want to shut out my pain, trauma, and shadow. But when I see them as 3 children in the closets of my memory that simply want to take my hand and take me to pastures of understanding, I feel more liberated. When I let them flow through me, I see the opportunity for compassion and invention. I feel my divine spark. You are not broken. You are unique and amazing. A survivor like no other, whom the Archons gave their best shot and lost.
And you could just let go. Finally know that you didn't have to hold on so tight. to realize that all your life, not all your love, all your hate, all your memory, all your pain, it was all the same thing. It was all the same dream, a dream that you had inside a locked room. A dream about being a person.
This all sounds very Jungian, and we are indeed getting forever young on this episode number 375 on this November, the year of our demiurge 2017. We are going deeper to find our pain, trauma, and shadow. I mentioned our guest and his book, and we are delighted to have back once again Robertson, who materializes at the virtual Alexandria to discuss his book, Inner Voices, and other essays on Jungian psychology, which recently came out in print edition. A remarkable book, and you'll be privy to a remarkable interview where we discuss a wide range of topics, including archetypes, projection, synchronicity, and so much more. We are going deeper to understand our pain, trauma, and shadow, to find that pearl of great price and the hidden Sophia of our lives. Rejoice.
Who am I? That's the real question, isn't it? Who am I? Who are you? What other questions are there? What other questions are there, really? If you want to understand the universe, embrace the universe, the door to the universe is you.
However, as Robin writes in Inner Voices, the gifts of our unconscious won't just materialize like an internet pop-up advertisement. We have to journey down to it or supplicate to it with surgical rituals and habits. In fact, not even listening to our unconscious is bad for us in more than emotional ways. As my friend Jim West wrote, in Jung's Mysterium, towards the end of the final work in his alchemical trilogy, he ominously writes on page 474, the unconscious has 1,000 ways of snuffing out a meaningless existence with surprising swiftness. To be perfectly clear, Jung warns us in no uncertain terms that this, quote, attitude may end in real death. Of course, Jung was exaggerating. The unconscious has countless ways to snuff out a meaningless existence, as opposed to merely one, quote, 1,000 ways.
Do you believe in fate, Neil?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
For good measure, Jung then cites 2 examples in this passage, saying that such a person is, quote, at the mercy of unforeseen dangers, so that he or she, quote, cannot get out of his car quickly enough, or else, quote, he misses his foothold somewhere out skiing on a mountain. One could go on and on with examples, from someone killing themselves with alcohol to entering into one disastrous relationship after another, to destroying themselves with the boomerang effect of general obnoxiousness, to hiding behind a wall of, quote, positive thinking. Like I said, there are countless ways the unconscious can snuff us out.
You created me. I didn't create some loser alter ego to make myself feel better.
Actually, all of these are walls to the unconscious self, and the trouble is that fate easily scales those walls, or simply breaks them down. Therein we have a viable meaning for the Tower card of the Tarot deck, which communicates destruction, which is negative, at least on the face of it, but ultimately is positive for making way for the contents of the unconscious and a greater truth, if we manage to survive. Along those same pithy lines, Jung likewise ominously writes on page 546 of Mysterium, the experience of the self is always the defeat of the ego. On the other hand, if we can defeat the ego through conscious integration, we can do much. That said, any failure to do so leads to failure. Or as Jung wrote earlier in the same book, quote, "Little can be achieved with will and good intentions if the unconscious does not lend a hand."
And what is any life if not the pursuit of a dream?
What if the dream became a nightmare?
Of course, your subconscious can always play tricks on you. The subconscious is a very powerful thing.
Warning and opportunity, I say to you, true seeker warriors. Listen to your unconscious and go today with those goddesses to your underworlds. Let us go deeper together. Let us find our pain, trauma, and shadow. And let us work together with our unconscious to become who we were meant to be. In our interview with Robertson.
I wonder, what do you really feel? After all, in this moment, you are in a unique position. A programmer who knows intimately how the machines work, and a machine who knows its own true nature.
I understand what I'm made of, how I'm coded, but I do not understand the things that I feel. Are they real? The things I experienced, my wife, the loss of my son.
Every host needs a backstory, Bernard, you know that. The self is a kind of fiction for hosts and humans alike. It's a story we tell ourselves, and every story needs a beginning. Your imagined suffering makes you lifelike.
Lifelike, but not alive. Pain only exists in the mind. It's always imagined. So what's the difference between my pain and yours? Between you and me?
This was the very question that consumed Arnold, filled him with guilt, eventually drove him mad. The answer always seemed obvious to me. There is no threshold that makes us greater than the sum of our parts, no inflection point at which we become fully alive. We can't define consciousness because consciousness does not exist. Humans fancy that there's something special about the way we perceive the world, and yet we live in loops as tight and as closed as the hosts do. Seldom questioning our choices, content for the most part to be told what to do next. Well, no, my friend, you're not missing anything at all.
This is the AM by interview. And I know I really always enjoy this because we are joined once again by Robertson. How are you doing today, Robin?
I'm doing great.
Great to have you back on. And this time we'll be focusing on the book that I really enjoyed. I got the paperback, and I've already got some, you might say, approachable, useful ideas from your work based on Jungian psychology and a whole bunch of esoterica. And the book is Inner Voices and Other Essays on Jungian Psychology. And with joining us, too, we've got the Moondog himself, our producer, Vance. How are you doing today, Vance?
I am not doing too badly.
Good, good. Well, hopefully we'll do better as the interview goes. So tell us, Robin, this is something we discussed many, many moons ago. We're talking years. I can't even remember the year exactly, but that's when we discussed your work on chaos theory based on your book Indra's Net. And we talked about your past and how you came to where you are today. So maybe as we have a whole new generation of listeners after these years, tell us a little bit about your spiritual hitchhiking.
All right. And by the way, I don't know if you checked, I think this is the 5th time we've had an interview together.
I think so, too. I think the last one we did on Frodo and Jung last year. But, yeah, we've done a few.
Yeah, that's good. Well, okay, we're going to go back 30-plus years.
All right.
At that time, in my mid-30s, I was like a junior vice president for a large insurance company in charge of a department that dealt with software. And I was, like I guess a lot of young men, very cocky, very sure of my place in the world and how everything was going to fit. And at that point in time, my best friend, who also worked for the same company, got fired. And this is a pretty normal thing in the scheme of things. I'd fired enough people in my time, but somehow I couldn't put that together inside me. I started slowly falling into a depression. It just didn't, what was the point of doing all of this at that point in time? And after a while, the first thing I came up with dealing with it was going to the I Ching, which I had always previously thought, boy, isn't this stupid? And now it seemed like a really wise counsel. And meditation. And meditation I did off and on for maybe 3 years, whatever, and still can draw on it when I need to. But still wasn't enough. And then I went into a Jungian analysis. I didn't know it was a Jungian analysis at the time. I just thought it was therapy and I needed something different. And that was a big breakthrough for me to get that connection with Jung himself, so that opened up things. And so like that was the first entry into that world. And then over time, it kind of became clear to me I was doing the wrong kind of work. This was not what was fulfilling my soul. And I decided that I was going to become a Jungian analyst too, which, by the way, I didn't. But that was the call to something new. And I started going back to school while I was still working, and was working on a PhD in psychology. First a master's in counseling psychology, and then a PhD in clinical psychology. And then somewhere along the line there, I didn't fit in with what I was doing anymore and had to leave that. So now I'd broken free, and it was kind of scary times in there. But so continued on. Now, maybe one other thing that is really critical in there, which is, as I got toward the end of my PhD, maybe a year away from finishing it, by that time I had been working with patients a lot, as part of your training to go on in two different places. They may come up in our talk today, and I realized. I realized I'd left my job behind. I had no money coming in. I couldn't take money for helping people heal. So here I was, up the creek without a paddle, because I was still a year away from even the PhD, and then at that point in time I couldn't take money for healing people. But I knew I was on the right track, and it turned out to be the right track. What happened instead was things fell into my life from my old world that I could do part-time and free up enough to still see patients and work on my own inner work and start writing books. So that's basically my story. Like anybody other story, by the way, there's all kinds of intricate little sideways along the way, but that's the main idea.
It's a great story. I remember listening to your interview on Mo's podcast, Gnostic Warrior, because I always enjoy what you have to say. And I remember you telling him that you knew things were going to work out and you never worried about money. I mean, at one point you even gave your books for free and everything just seems to work out. What's exactly that underlying philosophy that has led you to be okay, to grow?
I think when you're in contact, it's hard to say what word I don't care what somebody calls that bigger thing that's calling them. Once you make that contact, you never lose the fact that that's the most important thing going. Now, it doesn't mean that along the way you don't have some scary times happening. I've had plenty of scary times along the way, and it also seems to me once you make that, there comes a place where you have to bow down and say, this is more important to me than life or death. And if it's necessary for me to die, then that's necessary. I mean, that sounds awfully melodramatic, but I can remember actually hitting that point at a key point later on in there. And I have a really good friend named Gilda France. She just turned 90 in December. A wise old woman, if there ever was a wise old woman, and we talked about, and she's a Jungian analyst, a prominent one, and we talked about the fact that you meet so many on spiritual paths. You meet so many people who talk the talk, and you meet so few that walk the walk. You know, that you get the feeling that they can be really glib about it and sound like they know what they're talking about, but then when push comes to shove, well, you know, that's just talk. And to me, no matter which direction you pick, which thing calls to you from that higher power of some sort, if you really make that connection, it's the most important thing in your life.
I would agree, and I certainly try to walk the walk myself as much as I can. So, but why don't we get to your book again? I enjoyed it. I read it a few years ago, but now that it was on paperback, some I guess I'm old school. Sometimes just paperback works better for me. But I think we're just old school. But why don't you tell us a little bit about projection and why it isn't the boogeyman many talk about? And of course, sometimes I'm guilty. I'm in an argument with someone and I get all frazzled and I'll just start throwing out you're projecting. I guess I'm projecting my own projections. But tell us about projection.
Well, I think one of the problems is that, maybe back up a little. Jungians in general, and I'm going to get people screaming at me or whatever, are not very science-oriented, you know. So therefore, when they talk about projection, including Jung, they talk about it strictly from the very limited sense of it, of like psychological projection, where you're dealing with issues inside yourself and you're projecting them out. And we'll come to that. But projection is a basic force of nature. Up through, say, the 17th and maybe part of the 18th century, we used to have a simpler idea of how we encountered the world. The sensations would come in from the world. We would be like a passive receptacle organ. When we would process that and then deal with it, and you might think of that as you know, the most straightforward way you think about it. And then as we actually started doing experiments and research into those areas in the mid 20th century on, we found it doesn't work that way. That's not efficient enough. More often what happens is, we got to bring in something from the outside often, and once we've got it, we deal with it. Well, then we store that away, and we then use that so the next time we encounter something similar, we project out what we expect to have, and that's much more efficient, because then when we project out, most of the time we're doing things very quickly. If we project out and something's different than it's supposed to be, well, then we have to process that, and then that's more like bring it in the first time. But it's more often we're not. So say something simple, like driving a car. I don't know about you. I can still remember how hard it was originally to learn to drive a car, and it was a stick shift back in those days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but once that became known at the body level, where you've done it enough, then you didn't have to think about it anymore. It was stored away as a way of doing things. And also then, say, the directions to go to somebody's house or whatever was stored away, and you did that. Well, this is much more general. In fact, we move away from human beings to animals because, we're in that chain of animals that comes along. When we talk about animals, we use the word instinct, and we use it, so loosely, like an instinct for this or an instinct for that. But a lot of it is very, very detailed. I mean, the obvious things like spiders being born to create a web, but not only a web, but a very particular kind of web that fits their species of spiders. Or I'm very fond of a naturalist and zookeeper named Gerald Durrell, and who wrote a series of delightful books about his experiences. And I remember him talking about bowerbirds. And bowerbirds sit there and build nests so strong you almost can't pull it apart. It takes a very strong person to be able to pull it apart. Well, they pick up things that they need from the environment around them to build that. But say these days, now that humans are around, a lot of things they pick up are things like, say, a string, or a piece of foil or something like that didn't exist before. So therefore, the projection has to be both general enough, that it can handle that difference, and specific enough, that it builds this very exact kind of nest that they have. So then bring that back to human beings again, So when we look at projecting issues out onto the world, it's just like an extension of that. I mean, it's not, like often in psychology, when they talk about projections, well, you want to remove that. That shows something bad going on. But we project all the time. For instance, that, and I realize this one's a little long-winded that I'm going into, but like that's how we fall in love. When we fall in love with somebody, we start with something inside us that says, "Oh, this is the kind of woman or man that I'm interested in." Might have been formed by our mother or father, as a basis, but that gets projected out into the world. That's the type of person that we're interested in to begin with. Then once we make the connection with a person, if we have a real love relationship, we find the differences between them and the projection. And if we're adults and growing, our inner projection, the inner thing, a symbol that gets projected, it starts to modify to fit that. If we're not, like, a lot of guys I've seen over the years, we sit there and get bored with the person, drop them, and go on to the next one, never learning anything in that process. So you see, projection is very, very useful, very prevalent, and doesn't just fall readily into the way that most people see it. Have I made that clear enough?
Yes, indeed.
I understand.
Yes, I think, we certainly, we get it. And what I found fascinating in your chapter on projection was the story of the black and red ants that have been doing things for millions of years. And as you explained, they've been doing some projection of their own. Could you tell the audience about this fascinating reality in nature?
Yeah, and that came from Gerald Durrell, by the way, who I mentioned earlier, from one of his books, one of his stories in there. And that kind of illustrates how much we already have stored away at birth. We don't come into the world as blank slates. And I think we used to think, well, humans come in as blank slates, but maybe those animals and certain they might already be pre-programmed, almost like robots or whatever. Now all of us have something to begin with, and ants are the prototypical group intelligence. Where the colony of the ants tends to be smarter than any individual ant, but still, even each little individual ant has some portion of individuality built into it. And I had never thought of them as having any individuality until I read Gerald's story. In that, he was talking about red ants and black ants, and often the red ants are, say, the more aggressive, warrior-like or whatever, and they send out guides or I can't quite think of the word. They send out a just small number of ants in advance to look
scouts.
for possible. Oh yes, scouts. To look for a place where they could bring in young ants that they could then raise as slaves. Isn't that awful? But it's done in the... Anyway, so at this one point in time, he was observing a case where the red ants had now invaded a colony of black ants. And first was how clever they did it. They would attack at the beginning and split off into thirds, with the part in the middle continuing and the two on the side going around until that they had kind of enveloped the black ants on all sides. This is a technique that was used by Shaka Zulu against the British. If you ever saw the great movie Zulu or whatever like that,
Yeah, great movie.
That he had created, and was one of the advanced techniques of warfare. But at the point in time there when it was starting to finish and they had won the battle, the black ants were fighting to the death, most of them, and then they'd fight to the death, and then they'd lose, and the red ants would take off the baby black ants. But he observed some of them were either cowardly enough or smart enough that when they saw that happen, they just stepped away and okay, we lost the battle. I can't do anything else. The one thing I can do is survive. And it was striking to him, and it was striking to me, that something as simple in the level of individual development as an ant, even there, it could choose one of two ways that it could go. So that's the red ant and black ant story.
Wow, that reminds me of the current cultural turmoil that we're undergoing. Makes me think how much of it is really, quote unquote, instinctual,
Oh yeah, exactly. I don't know if you're going to get around to talking about this today or not with me, but I remember I talk a lot in one of the chapters about Paul MacLean's Triune theory of the brain, where he discussed, and of course he's simplifying it a little bit, but it helps to have a simpler category to look at. Whereas beyond the brain stem, which itself does a lot of processing of what goes on in the mind, you then hit the oldest brain, which they refer to as the reptile brain, or the sometimes the crocodile brain, but a very primitive, very interested in territorial things. Attack first. No gentler emotions going on there. And then you get into the next one, which surrounds it literally within the brain. There's this brain right around the spinal cord. And then around it is the mammalian brain, or the limbic system, we call it. And that's where we have the emotions that get connected, And then beyond that, we have the mammal brain, and a subset of that even that has learned to develop is the human brain. And here's the time frame we're talking about in there. The reptile brain goes back 250 million years ago, 250 million years. Yeah, okay, and 100 million to 150 million years later, then the mammal brain developed, and then within that mammal brain, the human brain is only 1 million, 2 million years old or whatever like that. And the key is that all three of those exist almost as independent entities. In other words, if something cuts down to the reptile brain, then we'll sit there and just automatically react like, this is mine. Get out of the way. I own it. There's no further processing, and things that should rightly be processed up by the mammal brain, where we can deal with emotional issues that are much more subtle, like a really good example of how well, we talk about, humans, human love, etc. Well, it's in the mammal brain that we find real love, and things like wolves or whatever, where the love between the parents and the child and between other members of the pack is so much more pronounced than it is in our own culture. And then finally we get to us. Then that's what we think of as us. That's where we're cogitating and all, and each of those is in conflict. That's a lot of the problems that we deal with, or just one or the other. And Vance, I think you're bringing up today. Well, what's going on in the world today? How much of that you just see is totally coming from that reptile brain?
I know. I think a lot of it.
Oh, yes. And by the way, for anybody who wants to read about that at some depth, they could go to Paul MacLean himself, but they could read The Dragons of Eden by Paul Sagan. And at one time, I think everybody knew who he was, because he was the scientist you would see on one show after another on TV.
Oh, Carl Sagan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carl Sagan, exactly. Carl Sagan. And that's a wonderful book. It's summarizing all of this, and anyway, I agree with you. It's still going on. And it's the parts of the brain aren't integrated, okay? And if I could say one thing further to the side about that, one of the things that William James pointed out, the kind of maybe the founder of modern psychology, was that the brain is kind of a best fit situation. It just makes use of whatever works at the time. This works, okay, I'll keep doing it. I won't try to necessarily improve it, make it better. So the brain itself is like a mix of all kinds of solutions it's had to have for things in the past, and that means both it can be pretty poor ways to do things, but it also has a great advantage, because then when we have to come up against something new, we have to make use of what we've already got, and we adapt things. Anyway, that's going pretty far off where.
Yeah, I guess it has to be plastic, right? The brain has to be plastic, because it never knows over the billions of years what it's going to run into next.
That's exactly right. I mean, it has to have that plastic quality that it can adapt. And when I was, going back to the point when that I was making originally, when I was talking about projection, the projection has to have two qualities. One, there has to be something inside us that already has a plan for what you want as the result, and it has to be pretty exact. But it also has to be plastic. It has to adapt to the differences in the actual situation in the world. And when you think about it, it's extraordinary that those have developed those twin qualities in living beings. That we do it that way. It's a good solution, and it's not the kind of solution that our highly rational cognitive faculties would think of. They would sit there, well, you design it as perfectly as you can. Well, perfect isn't always the best way to go.
Yeah, what you said, Robin, reminds me of, there's a quote by Philip K. Dick, and "Do androids dream of electric sheep?" And it goes, "We are all insects groping towards something terrible or divine." So thinking of the ants and the separate brains and integration, I think that quote certainly has a new meaning for me.
Well, but by the way, it's not chance that Philip K. Dick keeps popping up all over the place, is it?
No.
Oh, no.
And you could say that's a synchronicity, which is exactly what I wanted to talk about next. You have a chapter where you deal with it called Synchronicity in a New Light. Tell us, Robin, what is this new light about another misunderstood and certainly misused term?
Well, remember the concept of synchronicity by Jung. Let's say as a shorthand for it, meaningful coincidence. Coincidence that because we have coincidences all the time in the world, but a lot of them have meaning. There was a reason why that we had the coincidence, and you got to remember that Jung this was scout territory, if you like. He was going out into areas that were not fully developed by him, and that people are still thinking about. They haven't processed it fully, what's going on in there. And one of the things I brought in that chapter was looking at one, especially one idea, the idea of saliency, which a guy that I knew who talk about smart, when he was working for his PhD. No, I'm sorry. When he was working for his medical degree, and he was at that stage, he was so bored that he went ahead and picked up a PhD in mathematics too, just to have something more interesting to do.
Wow.
as he was going along with it, and he introduced me to this idea of saliency, which is a way of looking at meaning all the way down as far as you want to go, like down at the quantum level or something. You have to have something akin to and by the way, his name is Dr. William Soulis, and he's a Canadian. Okay, and I originally got to know him through chaos theory. Haven't seen him in about a decade, but smart cookie, And in nature, you have an awful lot of key and lock situations, which is again a very efficient way to do things. Where back up a little bit or whatever, like sometimes an efficient way to have something produce a proper result is to have a chaotic situation. You have it where you don't know what you got. You got everything but the kitchen sink out there. Then the say the key that's looking for a lock, somewhere within that chaos, it can identify something. Oh, that looks like a lock. That'll fit and operate with it. Well, a lot of biological things, biological organisms operate that way, which is that they have. And again, we're going back to the something being both specific and plastic. You're going back to something where it has to be good enough to operate, but not exactly limited to a certain circumstance. So anyway, why does that get into synchronicity? Well, this is why, if you remember in that chapter, I tell a lot of stories in that chapter. Okay, because
yes, indeed.
I think that we're still in the idea with synchronicity. We're still at the baby stage, of trying to understand that. It's like we understood causality. That seemed pretty simple to us. This leads to that, which leads to the next thing, etc. So we can follow like a chain of events that lead to something. And science, up until very recent science, said and no teleology. Okay, no final things. Nothing where, hey, it's the future pulling us into something. That's bad. That doesn't fit in with it. But actually, we know that both things are necessary all the time. We have things that are say via if you have a desire for something you really want, that desire pulls you into directions that'll help fulfill that desire. Well, that's teleological. It's not causal. You could at any point in time then sit there and trace what has causally led to that, and separate it from what's final is Jung's word for teleological. He uses a lot, but from the teleological, but you have to have both. And I remember when I first looked at synchronicity, it seemed to me, oh, okay, there's got to be something that's causal. You got to have something that's synchronistic, and you got to have a lot that's just kind of random in between and gets pulled in one or the other direction as is needed. Like the story that I led off that chapter on was in my early days working at a place called Beverlywood, which was a halfway home for severely disturbed young adults. And it had a kind of a strange entrance, you know. This had originally been some kind of a motel with maybe like 100 units in it, and it was blocked off by the street from a kind of a brick wall that was a little taller than a person's height, and it was, you'd go in through an opening in the street, and then you would take a little right turn for a few feet, and then you would go forward for a few feet, and then left for a few feet, and then there'd be an opening inside. So, you know, when you're in that middle place there, you can neither see the outside nor the inside. You know, you're hidden away from what was going on. And I found after I'd been there for a while that when I would get to that stage where I was cut off from the outside and not yet in the inside, I'd know what kind of a day it was. I'd know if it was crazy in there, you know, if people were, you know, running around in one way or another, or if there was a bad energy in the air. And I found at least one other person that worked that way that had that same knowledge. Well, you start to ask, what is it that's going on there? You know, we can throw out terms like ESP, etc., but all those really mean is we can talk about what happens. In this case, I'm picking up information I have no right to know, and I don't have a causal answer for what's happening to it. Well, I think a lot of things are like that, and therefore, if we start just acknowledging that there's things like synchronicity exist, we'll find that more and more just the observation of it shows us more situations where they occur. In my own experience, I found in key events in our life, you know, say we're getting ready for a new job, or we're starting to fall in love, or we're moving to a new place. Anything that's key event tends to generate synchronicities. It's not like it doesn't cause the synchronicities, but synchronicities start to occur, and if we're wise, we sit there and pay attention to them. As a therapist, again, when I was working at Beverlywood, I was also working at the same time at another place that was like an outpatient clinic for more normal folks, you know, people who are coming in with problems that they would probably be a one-time problem, and then you'd help them deal with it, and then they'd move on in their life one way or another. So very different kinds of patients, different kinds of problems. And I would find that at key times, say I've been working for a long time with someone, and suddenly there was a breakthrough, I would find that same kind of a breakthrough would be occurring with all of my patients. It might not be exactly the same day, it might be a day or two off or whatever, but I could just feel it occurring. And after I got smarter about it, I'd start realizing, well, it's also happening inside you, Robin. You know, there's something that's coming together right now. You have to pay close attention to what's happening. So these things are complicated. In that chapter, I also talked then about synchrony. You know?
Yes,
yes, I
agree.
I don't know if we want.
Go ahead.
You know, well, synchrony, you know, is easier to observe, but we don't realize how often it happens. Which is just things happen to join together at the same time. They make little joinings. One classic example they talk about it is in situations, say, where women are isolated from the rest of the world, from especially in the male world, on their own. Well, they find that their menstrual cycles start to match after a while. You know, they'll start at one point where, say, one might be the first of the month and the other one late in the month, somebody else in the middle, and after a while, one or the other of those times starts to spread until they all have the menstrual cycles at the same time. Well, some scientists, Condon and Birdwhistle, I remember Birdwhistle because it's such an unusual name, but it may have been Condon as well. they did some experiments on that, trying to see what was going on. And one tool that they used for doing that was taking videotapes of situations and then slowing them down and seeing if there was a synchrony of sort going on between, say, different human interactions when you wouldn't think there was anything specific going on. And one of the things they seem to find is in all human interaction, and I'm sure throughout the animal world too, but in all human interaction, it's like a dance all the time, almost like a very choreographed dance that no matter what the situation, once you slowed it down and followed it, you'd see that one thing was reacting with another one and in a very almost programmed way. And they had this wonderful example of a schoolyard where all the children seemed to be just running around doing everything in the world. But after they recorded it and really looked for details for quite a while, they found one particular little girl, an especially little active little girl, who at one time or another interacted with all the kids throughout the playground. And they could see that after that happened, they were all in synchrony with that little girl. It's like she was leading the process, and so much so they had someone who was an expert in music, and he found a contemporary rock song that he could plot to their movements, so that then you could see the movements occurring right in sync with the rocks, the music of the rock song. Well, to bring it to a conclusion, what I was saying in that new take on synchronicity is perhaps at least one part of the answer is that if we take synchrony and we combine it with saliency, so you have something in nature where things just happen together, move together, they're joined together, and you combine it with saliency, which is, hey, a more generalized feeling of meaning, that maybe the two of those are what is synchronicity. And that's as far as I've gotten with it. That's something I dug into some years ago. Haven't been smart enough to take it further. That's just...
No, it's a great chapter, and I learned a lot, and I think the audience will too. So moving on to another great Jungian term, that would be, of course, archetypes. And again, your chapter on it brought a lot of clarity, because as you describe, archetypes are formless images that are the building blocks of the collective unconscious. Is that about right, Robin? Or tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's right. And as you'll guess from reading that off, doesn't mean a lot, does it? Everything is true there. But what does it tell you?
Actually,
at one
it does.
time, yeah. Oh, it does. Well, then you're better at it than me. One of my early books, which has been my closest thing to a bestseller, it sold like 27,000 copies or something like that, is Beginner's Guide to Jungian Psychology. It's still the most used introduction to Jungian psychology in a lot of universities, colleges, and among a lot of therapists, whether they're Jungians or not, because it tries to make a lot of this simple. I tried out an alternative term to archetypes, which fell like a lead balloon. It didn't work at all. But I thought it scientifically kind of made more sense to it. I called them cognitive invariance. In other words, they are things that exist in the psyche, in the mind-brain combination, so they're cognitive. And they're invariant, meaning they don't vary with a particular person. They cut across all the people. All of them have these same archetypes, these same cognitive invariants, and that starts to to me to make some sense of what's going on. And of course that's also the part that by people that think Jungian psychology is crazy, and they don't pay much attention to that at all. But it's interesting, over the last 20, 25 years, something like that concept has started to emerge in a whole bunch of different fields just because it's so useful. They keep finding, and they never even mention Jung, and probably it's not that they're denying it, they're just not aware of that at all, but they start to find something like that where something is cutting across. And one of the areas where I always like when I would lecture, and in fact, sometimes I would lecture with that Bill Sulis that I mentioned, on these ideas. I don't find that it's all that necessary to separate archetype from instinct. Archetype's like a better word for something that often gets called instinctual, just because we use that when we're talking mostly about the animal world, but pretty much the same. One perfect example that I give, I bet I've given it in half of the things I've written somewhere or another. I try a way to fit it in. The most famous ethologist of the 20th century was Konrad Lorenz. And he has some wonderful animal stories, especially his dealing with birds, but with other animals as well too, that illustrate how archetypes or something akin to that from the instinctual world operate. He found that with goslings, little geese, that they would imprint. That is, something inside them was already there, and it would reach out and say, this thing in the outside world, that's what my inside thing is looking for. They would imprint mother on the first thing they saw upon coming into consciousness after birth, So if he was there when they were born, they would see Konrad Lorenz as their mother, and they would then behave as little babies did to their mother, expecting to be fed, expecting to follow him around and do what they were, imitate and learn from that, Well, he then sat there and tried to look at that imprinting behavior in a wide variety of birds and other animals, especially birds. And he found that in some cases it wasn't enough that it be the first person that was there that they would imprint on. It was, and sometimes I get which bird it is mixed up in it, but with some of them, he would have to make the sound that they expected to hear from that bird, the particular kind of squawk or squeak or whatever that would come out that would attach to that bird. And I especially also liked when he was dealing with magpies. Evidently, they're very smart birds. And so he could test the way they dealt with many things. For instance, you can tell I can go on and on about this because I really love what his work was. A lot of these birds and other animals instinctually know who their enemies are. If you, as soon as they're born, if you sit there and show them pictures of something that's traditionally an enemy, they run away right there. They don't. Whereas if it's something, say, somewhat similar but not one of the enemies, then they just proceed on with whatever they're doing. He found, say, magpies, though, that wasn't true. Magpies, they didn't instinctually know their enemies upon birth, but instinctually, once they were grown and had children of their own, it was instinctual to them to teach the children how to recognize their enemies. So he has these wonderful drawings of the magpie as an adult trying to teach the child, in a classroom with the blackboard, etc. One of the ones that was built in at this archetypal instinctual level. And by the way, I refer to that as the mother archetype. What else? I mean, what's wrong with that? That seems to me what's happening there.
Right, that's the formless image that I was talking about. So there's not an image of the female goose, but
perfect.
there is there.
You got it. Exactly. In other words, it obviously wasn't a picture of the particular kind of mother bird, because it didn't look very much like Konrad Lorenz. Another one that he has is it's built in, and it seems to be with humans too. When you reach a certain age where it's time to mate, then a whole other set of inner behaviors emerges out into the world that it's not there before then. And he found, I think again with the magpies, that this one magpie then started fixating on him as his potential mate. And one of the things that they would do to show their interest to the female magpie, these male magpies, was to bring them chewed up worms. And
how romantic.
Oh, how romantic! Yeah, exactly. And for a while he would let it put the worms in his mouth, but he just couldn't stand it anymore. So he kept his mouth closed really tight. But the magpie was clever enough. It looked around and it said, let me look for an orifice I could use. Started sticking it in his ear.
That's great. And so you would say, for example, the gods are the archetypes of what? Our own spiritual desire, our own spiritual desire to expand ourselves, to go higher?
I don't know. I mean, there you're in chicken and egg situations, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, when you went back to why is it that I felt from the time that I went on my own spiritual path, that I felt that it was the right thing to do to keep following it. Well, to me, there's clearly something bigger than me. This isn't a projection from of me out on there. We have a connection to the something bigger. Jung called it the self with a capital S, which is in order to encounter the Godhead, the divinity, the whatever it is that's bigger than us. Obviously, we have to have some kind of a category that's capable, at least of encountering it, of dealing with it. But that doesn't mean that it's just our inner category projected outwards. I mean, and my own feeling is it isn't. And it's also my own feeling that those are one of the kind of things to deal with that are bigger than we're really capable of dealing with. They say when you look at things like, and I'm shifting gears. I'm going to come back to it, but say when you're dealing with the question of whether reincarnation operates or not. Well, there's all kinds of good examples of saying, yeah, look at this, it has information wasn't available to it beforehand, it seems like. On the other hand, then there's the Jungian things. Well, it's already stored away in a collective unconscious, stored away collectively in some way, and we operate on it, and you can sit there and argue until the cows come home. Or I often say about all those kinds of issues, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I believe in reincarnation, and Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I don't, and Sundays I rest. Well, I think with a Godhead, we can't, the gods. I don't think we can prove it, in any way that's provable. So we have to sit there. We have to somehow make a metaphysical decision on our part, what we believe in and don't believe in. Metaphysics, like teleology, is another one of those terms that supposedly we've put a death knell to, but you never put a death knell to looking at what is bigger than the physical universe. So I don't know.
Yeah, agreed. No, agreed. And it was Jung who did say that archetypes can be, you might say, quasi-sentient. They have their own agenda. So this definitely, maybe it was Jung's way of sort of giving an outward, not projection, but reality to the gods.
He also, by the way, in that same light, complexes form around archetypes. In other words, complexes are when the archetype is there, and then we start encountering things out in the world. They start grouping around the archetype that pulled them in, and that was so important to Jung that in his late days, he felt that his whole psychology should really be called complex psychology. But it was, late enough in his work that hasn't caught on as a term one way or the other. But he thought that was the real central thing. And that at the level at a complex, it really does have a quasi existence, quasi intellectual existence. Multiple personalities, etc. Those, and by the way, again, that's a topic for another time. But I worked with multiple personalities for a while, so anyway, with patients with multiple.
Yes, you do cover. Yeah, you do cover it in your book, and like you said, for another time, because that's another very interesting topic, which we can bring into the whole idea of archetypes. Yeah. And what about you, Vance? Do you have a archetypal question on your mind?
Yeah, I was wondering, Robin, I have a way of thinking about all this, and kind of works for me. I see the universe instead of like, man, we're the big intelligence, and the animals are kind of instinctual, maybe a little bit. I see the entire universe is imbued with intelligence. The whole thing, I mean, beyond what we could see, is just loaded with intelligence from the very beginning. And then here we are with our conscious, limited intelligences, looking at all these things like the wonders of the animals and their quote unquote instincts, how they fly south and navigate by magnetism, and how they teach. And so I look at the whole thing as I don't see the real universe that's out there. I see a collection of qualia that my body puts together for me, and in a sense projects the entire thing out. My mind actually puts together, and yours and everybody's puts together our picture. There's so much more to the universe, like we can't see ultraviolet light, we can't see radiation, we can't see each other's thoughts, all these things that are real, but we don't see as part of our perceived world. So archetypes in the gods and so forth, we put a human face on these intelligences that we see in operation, but in actual fact, we're just putting a symbol on these perceived collections of qualia and combined with intelligence, and Jung called them archetypes and so forth. What do you think about all that?
Well, I tend to agree with almost everything you're saying, and in fact, circling around those areas are really what my own exploration has been almost through my whole life, and it's really hard to, there are a few metaphors that strike me as getting at some part of that. One is, and it's been expressed slightly different many times over time. Do you know the Argentinian writer?
Oh yeah, a great Gnostic himself. Yep. Dealt with great ideas.
Okay, yeah. He wrote one of his essays on this too, which the basic idea is God or the universe or whatever, but let's say God. God is an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. That's one of them that really pulls at me at saying, in a way, that's like a shorthand way of what you were saying.
Yes.
Which is there because, and by the way, that overlaps with Gnostic thought very, very, very much. Where
very much.
And it overlaps in a different way with Neoplatonistic thought in a Neoplatonism, where all those things are saying that there's this one thing and everything is an emanation from it in one way or another.
Yeah, the cave.
We, in our limited way, are trying to get back to it in one way or another. And the central insight that matches that is that we already possess it in a way. We already are it. We are, but we are limited, as you say, by our particular sense perceptions, our particular ways of being. So we can't be all of it. But there's
like we're in an eggshell, We see the little plays of light through our eggshell, and we know there's something out there, but until we break through the eggshell, we can't see the next level, which is probably another bigger egg that we have to break through and all that.
Yeah, that's another metaphor for that is why I took that title Indra's Net for that one book of mine, which is another model that, in that case from Buddhism, of saying exactly the same thing. Saying that there is a whole that are see because like a lot of more simple-minded occult ideas, so once you start on these paths, you start getting into all kinds of areas, and some are more simple-minded than others, because it's like, oh yeah, everything is connected. Well, what does that tell you? Or it's
we're all
waves,
one,
or it's all particles. Yeah, that's one way. It's like the dumber the explanation of it, the less you know that they've actually struggled with it and felt it at a human level. What's going on. But yeah, all these things are attempts to somehow reconcile those issues. And I think when we look back in time and we tend to think, well, we're so much smarter than the people earlier in time with us. Look how they didn't they didn't know how to make Oreos, or they didn't know how whatever it is, But human beings haven't gotten particularly smarter or dumber over the short period of our history, but we have progressively dug into issues, and some of them we semi-resolve over time, and are able to find some kind of a deeper answer. So sometimes when we do that, we've missed some essential part of the question and forgotten about it, and we have to get back to it again. These are the main things. So you see, for me, all of my writing, all of my books, etc., and maybe all my life, but say definitely all my writing, is all connected together. It's all dealing with the same things. They look like very diverse books, but every one of those is the one that pulled me at one time or another into trying to answer those essential questions, of where are we? How do I personally fit into it? Because that's always part of it. We can't sit there and think about these things at an impersonal level forever. We have to step away sometimes and look at it impersonally. But ultimately, it comes back to ourselves and how we fit into all these issues. So that's my life, and way back to your question.
Fantastic.
That's why I keep digging into these things further and further. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a traditional Jungian. I decided not to become a Jungian analyst, and a lot of my best friends are Jungians, and I write a lot with Jungian ideas at a central thing, because he did such a good job of answering so many of these questions. But he also had areas where he was way off too. So you have to. I'm sure you're that way with Gnostics ideas.
Oh yeah, I think maybe Jung himself wasn't really a Jungian in the terms of the modern definition, right? When they get all the rules.
In fact, he famously said, "Thank God I'm not a Jungian." And so, yeah.
This is all the time we have today, Robin. I'd like to thank you.
Oh, is it really?
Yes.
Really? This always happens with that, no?
Yes, there's so much to talk about. We need to do it again and deal with so much more, like the shadow, channeling, and all that other good stuff. I mean, we barely scratched the surface of your book.
At that time, we'll bring in divination and reading and all that stuff, because that's stuff that I know I haven't talked about, and that's really important.
Agreed. Yeah, we definitely need to touch on it.
And it was nice having you as well, Vance. It's nice having like three of us at the same time talking about these issues.
Well, thank you.
Have you ever tried having? Well, I guess you can't, because you do it different. One of the people that interviewed me. I think it was Layla Ashley. I'm not sure, whatever like that. Anyway, on her thing, it's a live one, and I like the fact yours is edited, etc. Hers was a live, like 2-hour one, and they had a room, what do they call those rooms where computers people can log in on the computer.
Chat room.
Chat room. They had a chat room, and people were calling in and asking their particular questions, and she'd look at it every now and then ask me, such and such is asking you about this and that. I kind of liked that. So I like that there's at least three of us, two of y'all asking different things.
Yes, where there are three, there is Jesus, as they say. The logos, the higher reason.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you very much
guys.
for coming on, Robin. We really enjoyed it.
And when I mentioned Layla, I can't go off without telling you, you're the best interviewer of all the interviewers that I've had one way or the other. You really dig into the topic, think about it, and you pull out, things that are like key things to center on that everything else tends to revolve around. I don't get that kind of really thoughtful interview very often.
Oh, well, thank you. Well,
sure
Vance keeps me honest, and the material is so good, I just can't let go. So it works out for everybody.
All righty. Well, we'll look forward to the next one.
All right, guys. Thank you very much, and have a good
Great,
day.
Robin.
And there you have it. The first part of our interview with Robin Robertson on many things Jung and beyond. Always great to chat with him. In our second part, Robin discusses the relationship of Jung and the Gnostics, as well as Neoplatonists. And we go deeper into other Jungian ideas and concepts. Also, Robin will surprisingly tell us why he dislikes the Red Book, and his unique views on the 7 sermons to the dead. Not to be missed as we embrace our pain, trauma, our shadow, all to become whole. Learn we have always been pure of heart. So please become a member to listen to the second part of this enlightening interview. Robin will also be in our Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group to answer your questions or issues, or if you need some advice. Yes, and always, only $5.99 a month to join. Complete and not partial shows. Access to 11 years of work. More than 375 episodes. You'll also get your own private RSS feed where you can listen to all complete shows. And of course, our invitation to our Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group, where we are building a community of mystics, madmen, and sages. Same benefits if you become a patron at Patreon, except you get early shows, or shows come out early for you. If anything, a few shekels here and there via PayPal or the US mail. Just let me know. All information can be found at, you got it, thegodabovegod.com. Let us keep this Red Pill cafeteria open, and let's keep that blasphemous content a-coming for the rest of 2017. I really can't do it without you. Much appreciation to you who support on a weekly basis. You make me whole in many ways. And let's give a shout out to other podcasters who take it to Jehovah and his archons. There are many good ones out there, but let me mention Skeptico, Rune Soup, O-Culture, Silly Rabbits, What's Your Theory, Megas Aeons, and others. Wish Gnostic Warrior and Talk Gnosis would get back on track, but I do understand how difficult it is to keep this medium going. Wish Jay Dyer would come on the show, but I understand he just doesn't like the Gnostics. I wish for a lot, I guess, but it is my core wish you have found the tools here to become whole, the best version of yourself, and a champion eternal as you were meant to be. Hello and goodbye as always.